Good evening, everyone, and happy Seersucker Day. If you didn't know it, today is Seersucker Day. And for the most part, it is a happy day here in Louisiana. I want to thank all of you for being here, and I especially want to thank the legislators who are here as well. Obviously, we just concluded the last regular session of my second term. And the truth is, I can't help but think back to my first Sunday night press conference back in 2016. The mood that day was very different. Back then, we were obviously still trying to work through a $2 billion budget deficit that had been left behind by the previous administration. It took numerous sessions to right the ship, but we really did it by working together, by persevering, and doing that in a bipartisan fashion. And then you fast forward to now. The bulk of the budget discussions this session were figuring out how to use surplus and excess dollars. So I just want everybody to pause for a minute and think about that. We went from debating how to make up for a $2 billion deficit to figure out how to appropriate $2 billion while we had $2 billion in the bank. And I can tell you from my experience that I prefer the latter rather than the former. Surpluses are better than deficits. I said in my opening address to the legislature, promises were made, promises were kept, and progress was delivered. And we did that together. And I want to be the very first to acknowledge, I don't have complete command of the specifics of the money bills that just passed the legislature. For that matter, I'm not sure that anyone who wasn't on a conference committee knows everything that's in there. But while the specifics aren't known, our understanding of the money bills, particularly House Bill 1, it's such that we can say that there was $2,000 additional for certificated personnel in our school systems and $1,000 for those who were non-certificated, our school support workers. We know that both the Senate and the House passed separate instruments evidencing their intent that that funding be included in permanent pay raises in the MFP resolution next year. We believe that there's also language in the preamble to that effect. So there's multiple instruments evidencing the intent of the legislature that that become a permanent part of teacher pay and therefore a pay raise. I want to voice my support for that as well. And this is not the first time that has happened. It happened in 2013. I know because I led that effort. And it was in fact included in the MFP resolution the next year and became a part of teacher pay. So I do want to reassure the teachers, the support workers across the state of Louisiana that it is not just my hope, but my belief that that will become part of permanent teacher pay raise, which we needed to do. In fact, we needed to do better than the 2,000 and the 1,000, and you know we had advocated for that as well. But that does bring the total teacher pay increase in Louisiana since 2019 to $5,300. Significant funding for early childhood education was also included. It wasn't what we had hoped for, wasn't what we had asked for. We asked for $60 million above baseline funding, and at the end of the day, we believe we have $44 million. But I can tell you that that is the largest amount of state general fund ever for early childhood education in the state of Louisiana. And so we can be thankful for that. There is not a higher priority for me, and quite frankly for many people and organizations across Louisiana than early childhood. Major investments were also made in higher education, and funding to waive fees for members of the Louisiana National Guard who attend our public higher education institutions is also included. There is a permanent supplemental pay increase, 20% pay increase in supplemental pay for qualified law enforcement officers and firefighters. Historic investments in roads, bridges, ports, and other infrastructure. Historic payments to decrease our debt. Investments in our state savings accounts to bring their balance to roughly $2.7 billion. And so a little later in this calendar year, when things happen by operation of law, I told you a while ago we had $2 billion in the bank. That amount by the end of this year is going to be much closer to $3 billion. Funding for the fortified roof and insurance incentive funds was also increased in the special session. I don't think either was increased to the extent that we had asked, but it was substantial investments in those initiatives, and we're thankful for that because we know that we have a crisis with respect to the affordability and availability of insurance in Louisiana, particularly in South Louisiana. So those are critical priorities that will be funded at historic levels thanks to the hard work of Democrats, Republicans, and the one independent, Joe Marino. That being said, we obviously didn't get everything that we wanted. We wanted a $3,000 teacher pay raise and a $1,500 raise for support workers, and certainly we could have afforded it. Now was the best time to do it, to get to the southern regional average. And so I do hope Louisiana's voters and the people who are seeking election this year will all commit themselves to getting our teachers to the southern regional average. And by the way, the pay goes to the teachers, the benefit goes to the students, goes to our children. We are obviously still looking through the budget, and we're going to be for the next few days. The $100 million cut to LDH is something that I am concerned about, and I want to let everyone in the state know now that I will use every means at my disposal to minimize or completely eliminate that funding reduction. Because a $100 million funding cut to LDH, because so much of their funds are used to match federal funds, could end up being several $100 million in reduction. And to do that at a time when our fiscal situation, it is better than it ever has been, when we have more money in the bank than we've ever had, and our forecast is so strong, is just ridiculous. It was a complete surprise to me, by the way. I suspect it was a surprise to 99% of the members who voted downstairs. For as much as we've accomplished together, I do think that there's still too much partisanship downstairs. You've heard me say this before. We're not Washington, D.C. yet. We're moving in that direction, and that is not a good thing. I do think differences of opinion can be good. I think debate can be helpful. That's how we work through difficult situations and come to compromise and ultimately serve the people that we were elected to serve. But when partisan national talking points that really have no bearing on our state, they don't really emanate from any issues that we're facing or any problems that need to be solved here, but when they come to Louisiana, they interfere with a lot that we have going on, and that includes the budget process. And quite frankly, our people are poorly served by that. And I'm also disappointed that several bills failed, once again, to make it through the legislative process. That includes an increase in the minimum wage, that includes bills to address the equal pay situation in Louisiana, which is among the worst in the country. And quite frankly, also I'm disappointed that we downstairs chose not to eliminate the death penalty. I believe these were all pro-life issues, and they should be embraced in a pro-life state like Louisiana. And it's disappointing that these pieces of legislation will not be passed during my term as governor. But I stand here very confident one day they will. I'm certain of that because many of the states around the country have already done these things. And I hope and pray that future legislatures and legislators do not allow Louisiana to remain behind when it comes to these important life issues. Ending on a positive note, I'm happy that several of my administration's priorities passed with overwhelming support, including the Patriot Scholarship Program, that will make it even easier for members of the Louisiana National Guard to afford higher education. The creation of the Cybersecurity Commission will coordinate between local, state, tribal, and federal governments, as well as the private sector to protect privacy and data. The partnership framework for expanding Dolly Parton's Imagination Library. This is going to ensure that every child in Louisiana between 0 and 5 years of age is eligible to receive an age-appropriate book per month. And if we do that, and if children are enrolled in the program at birth, by the time they start school, there are 60 books in their home. And I really am excited about that. And you heard the legislature talk about literacy a lot again this year. This is a big part of that. I believe Representative Kyle Green's bill to provide free breakfast and lunch for school children who qualify for reduced price meals was also a significant highlight for the session. And there were a lot of other positive measures that I look forward to putting my signature on. So overall, as I said at the outset of this press conference, I'm happy with most of the work that was done in this session. It wasn't easy. Quite frankly, it really is. And we make it much harder than it needs to be. I will just add that. But what's important at the end of the day is that we came together, we made significant progress, and that's going to help continuing moving Louisiana forward. So I'm going to take your questions here in just a moment. Please understand that an awful lot of bills were passed today and yesterday. They're not up here yet. We've not reviewed all of them. And so you can expect that I'm not going to give a clear answer to some of your questions about specific bills, especially the money bills and so forth that we're still trying to digest. But with that in mind, I will take your questions. Tyler, you're not going to be first? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Governor Edwards, the legislature passed 3 anti-LGBT bills. Will you veto them?
That is my expectation. Yes.
Governor, the Supreme Court issued a big ruling in Alabama voting rights.
Yeah.
I guess I'm wondering at what point you're going to issue a special session call.
Yeah.
To
So Sam, it's a good question. So the Supreme Court released a ruling today that was nominally in the Alabama case, but for those of you who don't know, the Louisiana litigation related to congressional redistricting was involved in that. In fact, Justice Alito put a stay on that pending the resolution of the case involving Alabama. Now, this just happened today. So everything I'm about to tell you is subject to change because we're trying to figure this out. It is my understanding that with the action by the Supreme Court today, that the stay has been lifted. The litigation that is in the Middle District of Louisiana can now continue. And the court, as you know, had already directed the Louisiana legislature to come in and address this situation. There was a special session to do that. It failed. And so the question now is whether the court is going to allow the legislature another opportunity to address this or whether it will impose, draft, whatever the right word is, a map of its own. I don't know. The court hasn't had an opportunity to set a status conference, and so I'm not sure how that's going to unfold. And I say all that just to let you know it is not inevitable that we will have a special session to do this because the court can decide to do it on its own. But it is a win for the people of Louisiana. It's a win for those people who believe in the Voting Rights Act. It is a win for those who believe in simple math and basic fairness. 1/3 of 6 is 2. And when you can draw 2 majority black districts that comply with all the redistricting principles, you ought to do it. I think the court made that very clear today. And so this is a win for the people of Louisiana, at least those people in Louisiana who believe in fair representation. Yes, ma'am.
Governor, when you say you were surprised by the $100 million reduction to the Department of Health, can we assume that the legislators didn't contact your office or the Department of Health to ask what that type of reduction would mean? And does that also mean that
Yeah, I don't want you to assume it. I'm going to tell you, it didn't happen. There was no heads up, period. And there was nothing that unfolded in the money committees in the House and the Senate along the lines of questioning, can you withstand a $100 million cut? And what would that look like? What reductions in federal funding would result, and how would that impact your delivery of services? And so just didn't happen. And again, to do it when you have the best fiscal situation in the history of the state, more money in the bank than you've ever had, and a forecast as strong as that which we have, it's unconscionable.
Can you explain what you need? How might you go about lessening these impacts?
Stay tuned. Yes, sir.
Governor, what would you rather see as far as redistricting, a special session of the legislature handling it, or a court on that? Are there benefits to either one?
You know, I don't really know that there, obviously, it is the state's business to get it done, but we had a session, special session, where the majority of the legislature rejected the second district that would have been a majority black district and drew the map that we currently are following. We had the court order the legislature to do what should have been done, and it failed. So how many times does the legislature get that opportunity, and is it even capable? Can they muster a majority to do that which a court tells it to do? I mean, it didn't happen. And so the question now, I think, is how much patience does the court have for this, understanding that we're already halfway through 2023, and the next election is next year. So this just happened today. I'm unable to give you a better answer than that, but again, stay tuned, and we'll try to work through this and do that which makes the most sense, but also that which complies with whatever orders we get from the court. Tyler.
Yeah, I'm hoping that you'll feel comfortable answering this question after the legislative session finished.
So if you start with, you hope I'll be comfortable answering, you're not expecting an answer, but go ahead.
You don't have to be as careful, but what do you think of the assessment that you and the Senate prevailed in being able to invest all the available money that the social conservatives have now ascended and they passed a bunch of bills that are challenging for you?
Yeah, you know, it's pretty interesting, I think, the way this developed. I always believed that the argument, and this is what I heard being advanced by the 19 as it turned out, not the 36, was that they didn't want a repeat of what happened in 2008 when Governor General came in and the economy was booming. We had surplus money. Money was spent, taxes were cut. Next thing you know, there's a deficit, and we're leading the country in disinvestment in higher education and making cuts across the board, ultimately resulting in that $2 billion budget deficit. But the situation today is nothing like that. And either the individuals who were saying that weren't paying attention over the last several years to the way we've been budgeting. They're not paying attention to the revenue estimating conference, and when they talk about the forecast going forward. They're not looking at the balances in our savings accounts, which are more than 5 times higher than they were when Governor Jindal left office. So the situation is completely different, to the point where the REC meeting most recently, where the 2 economists testified that even when the 0.45 cents is additional sales tax goes away in 2026, as it's scheduled to do, they do not forecast a deficit situation as a result of that. But those 19 members kept trotting that out as if it justified not making investments in education, not paying our teachers better, not doing the early childhood, not funding the increases in higher ed. And if you're not going to try to get your teachers to the Southern Regional average this year, what you are really saying is we don't value our teachers in Louisiana the way other states do in the South. I mean, that's what you're saying. But the situations are not the same. And they're not the same because we have not for a single time since I've been governor spent a one-time dollar on recurring expenditures. It's not in my budget that I've been proposing, and it's not in the budgets that we have been enacting. And then we haven't incorporated all of the recurring funding that has been in the forecast into recurring expenditures. And that's true again this year. There will be record amounts of recurring funding revenue that will go to one-time expenditures. And that's how we have had a trend line going forward where in 2026, when the 0.45 goes away, we're not going to have a deficit situation. And so for these 19 to suddenly act like they really worry about funding for higher education and so forth, and therefore we shouldn't be investing these dollars now, the overwhelming majority of them one-time dollars that should be invested to improve roads and bridges and ports and coastal restoration and protection, all sorts of meaningful, good investments so that we can get ahead of inflation. Because that's not going to go away. And the sooner you appropriate the dollars, do the RFPs and go through the procurement process and sign those contracts, you actually transfer the risk of additional inflation away from the state and onto the contractor. And you get the projects done a lot faster. And if you really listen to what many of the 19 were saying is, they weren't against spending the money, they just didn't want to do it this year. They wanted to do it next year. Why would they want to delay a year while all this inflation is going on and we have all these critical priorities that need funding now? I don't know. I'll leave that for you to ask them. But the good news is that's not the way it happened.
With all due respect, I was asking more of a political question. It seems like you in the Senate scored a win and money. If the social conservatives see the Senate, posing even a greater challenge to you now.
You know, so there's a distinction you're making between the social conservatives and the fiscal conservatives. They're the same people. There's only 19 of them down there, Tyler. Yeah. Yeah. There's not a lot of people who, at the end of the day, don't see the value of investing money in critical priorities, whether it's one-time money in infrastructure, for example, or whether it was recurring funding in education. And that played out. That's the way I expected it to happen. It did happen. And I really don't want to sit up here and say that, you know, the governor's office and the Senate we won and the House lost. The people of Louisiana won. And to the extent that the 19 take it personally, they lost. But that really isn't the way this works. And there is a little bit of a difference. And I think there's a national playbook at issue on some of these social issues. And if a state anywhere brings some hot button social issue legislation, then states everywhere feel like they have to do it, even if, as testified in the committees, There's never been a case of those things happening in Louisiana, and some of these bills affect a couple or 3 dozen people in our entire state of 4.65 million. You know, all of a sudden, I mean, these are things that we just have to do. I reject that. And I will tell you that on those issues, the judgment of history, I believe, will be very clear. It will be as clear as the judgment of history has been on those who didn't want civil rights in the 50s, for example. But I'm not going to wait until then to say it's wrong. My judgment today is those bills are wrong. Yes?
Do you think the Democratic Party needs to be more aggressive about taking like offensive action on those issues?
Well, I don't know. I'm not going to give advice to the party in terms of what they do or don't do. I've not been one to sit up here and do a lot of promotion of party or you know, attacking the Republicans or anything like that. At the end of the day, we've accomplished great things in Louisiana, and I've done it with Republican majorities and now Republican supermajorities. And so I don't really look at the world that way. My message is not to Republicans, it's not to Democrats, it's not to independents, it's to everybody in Louisiana. Let's pay attention to what we're doing. Let's focus on the real problems. Let's try to unite and not divide. Let's don't pick on very small minorities who happen to be comprised of the most vulnerable, fragile children in our state, those most likely to engage in suicidal ideation and suicidal attempts. There's nothing great in that. That's not what we should aspire to. We're better than that. We are better than that.
Last question.
You get it.
Governor Edwards, yesterday the NAACP proposed a travel advisory against Louisiana, similar to Florida, due to recent legislative policies and actions that they say make it unsafe for people of color and members of the LGBTQ community. What's your response to that?
Well, it's at least premature because those legislative actions haven't become law, right? And so I'm not going to comment too much on it. I don't think there's any reason for any sort of a travel advisory from people coming to Louisiana. That's just not the way I see the world. I'm sure they had some reason to do it. It's not anything that I agree with. And legislative actions are not laws. Look, thank you so much for coming out tonight. It is a good day for our state, whether you're wearing seersucker or not. Thanks and God bless. And thank you.